Good afternoon, class. As you know, of course, my name is Miss Murphy. For the past couple weeks, we've been working on creative writing in our English class. Now, it's been a really fun semester working on that because you've all been very creative, you've all been really interested. And so far, we've already gone over point of view, we've already gone over setting, characters, plot. The next thing we're going to work on is very, very important to creating a good story that people will believe and enjoy. And it is dialogue. There's a lot of reasons why dialogue is important, not so much more than the other things we've worked on, but definitely just as much, even though it'll probably the smallest percentage of writing within your story. First and foremost, dialogue is one of the best ways to create verisimilitude within your story. As you know, of course, verisimilitude is the authenticness of your story, how realistic it feels, how genuine your characters feel, how human it is, whether or not your characters are even human. And good dialogue is really important to that. If two characters speak to each other and it feels flat, it feels fake, it feels like somebody wrote it, it doesn't feel like a story, as funny as that is. It can make good characters who are really well written otherwise feel very flat. It can make setting feel weird if you're writing in the an urban setting and they're talking as though they belong in the Victorian era. It's just going to conflict a lot. It can also be really boring to read. It takes up space, it takes up time, it takes up energy for the writing. And if you waste what dialogue you do have, it's going to hurt your story. It's also very important because conversations are the number one way people interact in the real world. And in your story, one of the most important things that's going to happen is character interaction. So, before we get started on what dialogue is and how we're going to use it, we're going to do a quick warm-up activity that's going to show a couple examples of dialogue from published, well-acclaimed works, and we're just going to kind of talk about what they do for the story. The first one is from Soulless, a book by Gail Carriger. It takes place in a fantasy steampunk Victorian era, so the dialogue is going to feel a little Jane Austen flowery, but that's also the point. So, to start, the first sentence is going to be Alexia Taribati speaking, and then it's going to be her and her butler conversing. I mean to say, really, I am near to developing a neurosis. Is there anyone around who doesn't want to study or kill me? Flute raised a tentative hand. Ah, yes, thank you, Flute. There is also Mrs. Tunstall, madam, he offered hopefully, as if Ivy were some kind of consolation prize. I notice you don't mention my fair weather husband. I suspect at this moment, madam, he probably wants to kill you. Alexia couldn't help smiling. Good point. One of the reasons I personally enjoy this dialogue is it has a lot of character in it. You can see the relationship between Alexia and her butler Flute. He refers to her as madam. She does not refer to him as sir. So it creates character interaction. It creates where he stands compared to her. And it also shows how polite he is and how comical she can be, where she's in a very dangerous situation and she's saying, oh, I'm developing a neurosis, which she, of course, isn't. And then it brings in her husband, and it brings in his character, and it's entertaining to read, which is also important for dialogue. The next one we're going to read is from Fairy Wars by Herbie Brennan. Now, this story is young adult, it's very comedy, and it takes place in a very strange fantasy world, which doesn't look like the real world at all, where the fairies live on a portal. So it's going to sound very different from the last one, which is important. Dialogue sounds different for different stories. The main character is a young boy who keeps getting into mischief, and it starts like this. He caught me stealing his golden phoenix. Tithonius closed his eyes briefly. Good grief! He opened them again. I was half hoping it wasn't true. Have you any idea of the implications? He was mistreating it, Pragus protested. Of course he was mistreating it. This is Black Hairstreak we're talking about. He mistreats his own mother. I don't suppose you stole her as well. An end. Once again, this is good for character. It shows how two people interact, how a younger character is interacting with an older character, and the difference in the way they talk. Bragus talks very simply, very straightforward, whereas the older character, Tithonus, is a little bit more eloquent when he says, "Have you any idea of the implications?" It sounds a little bit more formal. This section also pushes plot along, which is something we're going to discuss later. Dialogue needs to reveal some plot sometimes. Sometimes it's more important to have it said in the character's words than just in the description where no other characters are going to hear it. So this is a way not only of telling you how Black Hairstreak, another character who will show up later, not only are we finding out what he is like, but we're also finding out how other characters react to him. That's another thing dialogue is good for. Now, we're done with that, so we are going to move on to what is dialogue. First and foremost, dialogue is a conversation between two or more people. The more people you have in a conversation, the more difficult it is to work everything, but it can be between large groups of people, or just two, or even a character in their own reflection. It's still technically dialogue. Dialogue is essential to fiction writing. It is possible to write full short stories without dialogue. There are many people who have done it. They may not always be the most interesting, but I know there are some very good ones. I can't name any off the top of my head right now. But they exist, and there are some stories that are completely dialogue with nothing else. Now those are a little bit harder to manage, but my point aside, I digress. For most short stories, dialogue is going to factor in, dialogue is going to be important. Dialogue brings characters to life and adds interest. We saw this in the earlier examples. These characters, it's showing how they interact with people, how they interact with their environment, how they speak. They might speak differently than other characters in the story, and it makes them more interesting. If some character has odd quirks of phrase that they say, where instead of saying, "killed two birds with one stone," he says, "he beat two birds with one stick." That's something my friend does, actually. That character now has something that you can remember him by. He talks funny. He does something different than you would expect. Dialogue must do more than just duplicate real speech. Now, this one is important and kind of goes against what we've been saying in a way. We've been saying dialogue has to be realistic. Dialogue has to be believable. But dialogue also has to give the illusion of realism. It has to be a little bit better than real life. Because if you just put, "Hey, how are you?" and people talking like that in a story, it's kind of boring. Writing dialogue consists of the most exciting, most interesting, most emotional, and most dramatic words. Like I said before, "Hey, how are you?" "Go, good, I'm doing good, how are you?" That's going to be kind of boring dialogue. You want to have the stuff that's interesting. The meat of the matter is usually in the dialogue. The next thing we're going to talk about is the purpose of dialogue in a story. There are three main purposes of dialogue within a story. It provides information or moves the plot along. That's one. It reveals character, and it entertains. Often dialogue does all three. If you've ever turned a page in the book and you get a whole thing of dialogue, the next 2 pages are nothing but characters bantering back and forth, it's usually it's usually quick, it's usually fun, it's usually a lot of character development in a very short time. Dialogue can be a lot of fun. It can be difficult to write and difficult to get a hang of, but when you do, it can be a lot of fun. So the next thing we're going to talk about is dialogue tags. Dialogue tags are the he said, she said at the end of a dialogue quotations that's going to indicate who is saying what and how they are saying it. So those are important because if you just have lines of dialogue and no attribution / tag to the end of it, people aren't going to know who is saying what. One of the things you really want to avoid is using adverbs on the end of your dialogue tags. If she says something and she said loudly, that's okay, it gets it across, but she shouted is much more powerful, it's much more poignant, it tells you exactly what she's doing. And there's also going to be a difference between she screamed, she shrieked, she yelled. Those all have slightly different connotations, and it makes a difference. Or, she yelled angrily. You should be able to tell by what the dialogue is saying that she said it angrily. As you can see in these other ones, let me find a good example. Good grief, he opened his eyes again. We don't have to say, good grief, he shouted. We know that he's probably exasperated, or he said exasperatedly. That's pretty bad. But you get my point. So now we're about to write some dialogue of our own. Before we do that, though, I'm just going to give you guys a few tips to keep in mind while you're writing. Just a few tips for in general, things to keep in mind as you're writing your own dialogue. Listen to how people talk. In this case, we're obviously going to be thinking more than listening because we're not hearing anything, but think about how people talk in real life. How do they sound? How do they word things? They don't always speak grammatically correct. We already said it's not quite like real speech. Don't talk too much in text. We don't need to have paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs. Jane Austen used to do it and get away with it. We can't do that so much in these days. Readers aren't interested in pages and pages of dialogue. Break your dialogue up with action. Instead of just lines and lines, dialogue after dialogue, break it up. He said, he walked across the room, he sat down, things like that. Break it up a little bit. Make it feel real. Make it feel like that conversation is actually happening. Read widely. This is for tips for outside of class, but read. Read how dialogue is used in other books. Read tips in other books even. Those kinds of things are important. Reading widely is going to give you a sense of how other genres write dialogue, how other characters speak. It's going to give you a lot of ideas. Now, the activity we're going to do is kind of fun. We're all going to gather into pairs, and once we're in pairs, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I have 9 scenarios for character A and character B. You are going to, as group partners, pick a scenario and write 10 to 15 lines of dialogue for that scenario. It can be anything. It can be silly. And we're going to share them afterwards if you guys would like. So just 10 to 15, roughly half a page. So the first one is character A is confronting character B about something bad they have done. It's intense. Character A suspects character B is a werewolf. Character A and character B are taking care of a litter of orphaned puppies or kittens. That's cute. Character A giving character B a present. Character A is a demon summoned by character B to do their bidding. Character A and character B are rivals in a competition or a contest. Character A wins. It's an option. Character A reveals a secret to character B. Character B has offended character A in some way but doesn't realize it. That's another intense one. Character A confessed their love to character B but was rejected. That's a sad one. So now you can all get together in pairs and just come up with something fun. It doesn't have to be perfect dialogue. We'll all work on these together. It's just it's an activity to see what you can do and see what you can make up. So, go. Okay. Where did mine go? Oh. We're going to pretend that 10 minutes or so have passed. And here is an example of the prompt that was, character A is a demon summoned by character B to do their bidding. A shadowed form rose from the circle, burned into the hardwood floor. Smoke wrapped around Agnes's arms as the figure in front of her lifted its head. Horns curled around its ears and red eyes pierced right through her. The demon tilted its head to the side and grinned with every tooth. "How can I serve you, master?" Agnes looked the demon up and down. She took a hasty step back. "You don't look very helpful to me." It swooped out of the circle. Below the waist, the demon was smoke, and as it swept around Agnes, the smoke broke off in pieces that brushed against her skin. "You summoned a demon," it said. "Should I have come with rabbit ears instead of horns?" Agnes wrinkled her nose at the demon, but its voice sent a chill down her spine. The book said an eager and helpful familiar, so I was thinking something a little cuter. A dark look passed over the demon's face. "Then you should have summoned an imp. Now there's an idea, Agnes ducked under the demon's shoulder and picked up the open book she'd left on the table. "What's cuter, a fairy or an imp?" The demon crossed its arms and frowned. "Is there really one with rabbit ears?" she asked. When the demon didn't answer, she shrugged. "I'll figure it out. Thanks for the tip." Now that was very good, whoever wrote that. One thing I wanted to comment that I really enjoyed about it is you don't feel the need to dialogue tag every single line of dialogue. That's something I neglected to mention earlier. That's actually very important. If it's very clear who is saying the dialogue, you don't always need to add the he said, she said. Sometimes that gets very repetitive, so if you don't need to add that, you don't have to. So that's the activity. And next class, we'll read more of the other ones. We only got a chance for one this time, but I would like to hear what everybody has written. They can be a lot of fun, and we can discuss them and maybe even help each other with some tips. So your homework for tonight is going to be... to write one page of a dialogue-heavy scene, anything you want, fantasy, realistic, whatever you want. So that's going to be the homework for tonight, and just keep in mind how important dialogue is for our short stories. I will see you again next class, and hopefully we have something interesting to read. Thank you.